A single Bible, its leather cover worn and edges frayed, lies abandoned in the swirling dust of a narrow Cairo alley. The morning sun glints off faded gold lettering, illuminating a name handwritten inside the cover. Sister Maria. Around it, the city pulses with life, vendors shouting, children laughing. The distant call to prayer echoing through the ancient streets. But here, in this forgotten corner, the world seems to hold its breath. No one knows how long the Bible has been there, or who left it behind. Yet for those who stumble upon it, the book is more than a relic, it's a silent witness to a story that has vanished into the shadows. Every year, over 12,000 women are reported missing while traveling or living abroad. Some are found. Most are not. Their stories, like footprints in the sand, are quickly swept away by the winds of time and indifference. But sometimes, a single clue, a photograph, a letter, a Bible remains, begging for answers, refusing to let the world forget. This is the story of Sister Maria, a woman of faith who left everything she knew behind for a promise of love in a foreign land. She was not reckless nor naive. She was searching for meaning, for connection, for something more than the quiet certainty of her convent walls. But in the labyrinth of Cairo's streets, hope can turn to fear in an instant. And trust can become a weapon. What happened to Sister Maria? Why did she leave her life behind? And why, after 2 months, was the only thing left of her a Bible in the dust? As we unravel her story, you'll discover the hidden dangers that can lurk behind the most innocent-seeming invitations, and the chilling truth that sometimes faith alone is not enough to save us. But before we can answer those questions, we must return to the beginning. To a life defined by devotion, longing, and a single, fateful choice. Sister Maria was born Maria Elena Rossi in a small, sun-drenched village in southern Italy, where olive trees stretched toward the horizon and the church bell marked the rhythm of daily life. The youngest of 5 children, she grew up in a modest stone house, her world shaped by the gentle strength of her mother and the quiet faith of her father. From an early age, Maria was drawn to the rituals of the church, the flicker of candlelight, the scent of incense, the solemn beauty of hymns echoing through ancient walls. She was a thoughtful, sensitive child, often found reading in the shade or tending to the garden, her heart tuned to the suffering and joys of those around her. As she grew older, Maria's faith deepened, becoming both a refuge and a calling. At 17, after a season of personal loss and uncertainty, she made the decision that would define her life. She would join the Sisters of Mercy, a small order known for their compassion and service. Her family, though proud, wept as she left home, knowing the world she was entering would be one of discipline, sacrifice, and separation. Maria herself felt a bittersweet ache, a longing for the familiar, mixed with the hope that she was answering a higher purpose. Life in the convent was both beautiful and demanding. The days began before dawn, with prayer and meditation in the cool, stone chapel. There were chores to be done, cooking, cleaning, tending to the sick and elderly in the nearby village. The sisters lived simply, sharing everything, their lives woven together by routine and ritual. For Maria, the convent was a place of peace, but also of quiet struggle. She found comfort in the structure, the sense of belonging, the certainty that her life had meaning. Yet, beneath the surface, a restlessness grew, a yearning for something more. Maria was not immune to loneliness. The silence of the convent, once soothing, sometimes pressed in on her, amplifying her doubts and desires. She watched as other sisters seemed content, their faces serene as they moved through the day. But Maria's heart was restless, her mind often wandering to the world beyond the convent walls. She wondered what it would be like to travel, to see distant places, to meet people whose lives were different from her own. She longed for connection, for conversation, for the kind of friendship that could reach beyond the boundaries of faith and duty. Her spiritual director, An elderly nun, named Sister Agnes, noticed Maria's struggle. "It is not a sin to long for more, Maria," she would say gently. "God made your heart wide for a reason. But be careful sometimes. What we seek outside ourselves is already within." Maria tried to take these words to heart, but the ache remained. She began to spend more time in the convent's small library, reading about missionaries, saints, and ordinary people who had found purpose in unexpected places. She wrote letters to her family, to old friends, searching for a sense of connection that seemed just out of reach. It was during these quiet, searching hours that Maria first discovered the world beyond the convent, through the internet. The sisters had a single computer, used mostly for correspondence and research. Maria, curious and cautious, began to explore religious forums and discussion groups, seeking community and understanding. She was careful, always mindful of her vows. But the conversations she found there awakened something in her, a sense of possibility, of hope, of being seen and heard. Maria's longing was not for romance, but for meaning. She wanted to make a difference, to feel alive, to know that her life mattered beyond the walls of the convent. She prayed for guidance, for a sign, for something to fill the emptiness she could not name. She did not know that her search for connection would soon lead her down a path she could never have imagined, a path that would test her faith, her courage, and her very sense of self. And as the days passed, the world outside the convent began to call to her, quietly at first, then with a force she could no longer ignore. It began, innocently enough, as so many stories do. One evening, after her chores were finished, and the convent had settled into its nightly hush, Sister Maria sat at the old computer in the library, scrolling through a religious discussion forum she'd recently discovered. The forum was a gathering place for people of faith from around the world, priests, nuns, lay people, and seekers, sharing prayers, stories, and questions about life's deeper meaning. For Maria, it was a window into a world she'd only glimpsed in books, a place where she could listen and, sometimes, speak. On a thread about forgiveness, Maria posted a thoughtful reply, quoting a passage from the Gospel of Luke. Within hours, she received a private message from a user named Daniel. His words were warm and respectful, thanking her for her insight and sharing his own struggles with forgiveness. He introduced himself as Daniel Haddad, a Christian businessman living in Cairo, married with 2 children, but feeling spiritually adrift. He wrote of his longing to reconnect with his faith, his admiration for those who had devoted their lives to service, and his hope that, through conversation, he might find his way back to God. Maria was touched by his vulnerability. She replied, offering encouragement and a promise to pray for him. Their exchange was brief, but something about Daniel's sincerity lingered in her mind. Over the next few days, their messages became more frequent. Daniel would ask questions about scripture, about prayer, about the challenges of living a life of faith in a world that often seemed indifferent or hostile. Maria found herself looking forward to his messages, her heart lifting at the sight of his name in her inbox. Their conversations deepened, moving beyond theology to the details of their daily lives. Daniel described the bustling streets of Cairo, the scent of spices in the market, the laughter of his children, and the loneliness he sometimes felt in his marriage. He spoke of his wife Layla, with a mixture of affection and sadness, confiding that their relationship had grown distant over the years. Maria listened, offering gentle advice and compassion, careful never to cross the boundaries of her vows. Yet, as the weeks passed, she felt a growing connection, a sense that Daniel understood her in a way few others did. For Maria, these late-night exchanges became a lifeline. She shared stories from her childhood, her struggles with doubt, her dreams of making a difference in the world. Daniel responded with empathy and encouragement, always attentive, always kind. He praised her wisdom, her courage, her faith. He made her feel seen, valued, and understood. In the quiet of the convent, where her days were filled with routine and silence, Daniel's words were a spark of light. But beneath the warmth of their connection, subtle red flags began to appear, small, almost imperceptible at first. Daniel's questions sometimes strayed from faith to more personal matters. Did Maria ever feel lonely? Did she ever wish for a family of her own? He would apologize for his candor, blaming his loneliness, but the questions lingered. He began to send her articles about missionary work in Egypt, hinting at the need for people like her in his country. He spoke of the challenges he faced, the dangers of being a Christian in Cairo, and how much he admired her courage. Maria, flattered and moved, brushed aside her unease. She told herself that Daniel was simply searching for guidance, that his admiration was innocent. Yet, the audience can sense what Maria cannot: the subtle shift in tone. The way Daniel's words begin to blur the line between spiritual longing and something more personal. He never spoke ill of his wife, but he painted himself as a man misunderstood, yearning for connection, for someone who truly cared. One evening, Daniel sent Maria a photograph of a sunset over the Nile, writing, "I wish you could see this. It's beautiful, but it feels empty without someone to share it with." Maria's heart ached with empathy. Her own longing mirrored in his words. She replied with a prayer, but the boundaries between them had already begun to erode. To Maria, Daniel was a friend, a soul in need. To the audience, he is something else, a man whose charm masks deeper intentions, whose loneliness may be a carefully crafted story. The hope in Maria's heart is palpable, but so is the danger lurking just beneath the surface. And as their conversations continue, the line between trust and betrayal grows ever thinner, setting the stage for a journey that will change Maria's life forever. What began as a gentle exchange of faith and encouragement soon blossomed into something Maria had never anticipated. The emails between her and Daniel grew longer, more intimate, and more frequent. What once was a few lines of scripture or a thoughtful reply became pages of confessions, dreams, and vulnerabilities. Maria found herself waiting for his messages, her heart fluttering with anticipation each time she logged onto the convent's computer. She told herself it was friendship, a spiritual kinship, but deep down, she felt the stirrings of something she had long denied herself. Desire. Daniel, for his part, seemed to sense Maria's growing attachment. He began to write late at night, when the world was quiet and the boundaries between right and wrong felt blurred. His words became softer, more personal. He would ask about her favorite childhood memories, her fears, her hopes for the future. He confessed that he often thought of her during his daily prayers, that her words brought him comfort in a way nothing else could. He told her she was special, that she had a rare gift for understanding the human heart. It wasn't long before their communication moved beyond the written word. Daniel suggested they speak on the phone, just once, to hear each other's voices. Maria hesitated, torn between her vows and her longing for connection. But Daniel was persuasive, assuring her that a single call would do no harm. The first time she heard his voice, warm, gentle, with a hint of an accent, Maria felt a jolt of electricity. Their conversation lasted nearly an hour, filled with laughter, confessions, and moments of silence that felt more intimate than words. After that, the calls became a secret ritual. Maria would sneak away to the convent's garden or the quiet of her small room, pressing the phone to her ear, her heart pounding with guilt and excitement. Daniel's voice became a lifeline, a source of comfort and validation. He told her about his struggles at work, his loneliness at home, his dreams of a life filled with purpose and love. He spoke of Cairo as a place of both beauty and hardship, a city where faith was tested daily. He hinted that he wished he could share his life with someone who truly understood him. Maria's internal conflict grew with each passing day. She prayed for guidance, begging God to help her resist temptation, to remember her vows. But Daniel's words echoed in her mind, drowning out her doubts. He told her she was brave, that she deserved happiness, that God would not want her to live in loneliness and fear. He began to question the strictness of her order, suggesting that perhaps her true calling was not within the convent walls, but out in the world, helping others, maybe even in Cairo. Daniel's manipulative tactics were subtle but effective. He never pressured Maria outright, but he planted seeds of doubt, gently undermining her confidence in her choices. He would share stories of women who had left religious life to find love and fulfillment, always framing it as a journey of faith rather than betrayal. He praised her compassion, her intelligence, her beauty qualities Maria had never allowed herself to acknowledge. He made her feel seen, cherished, and needed. Maria's infatuation deepened, and with it, her sense of isolation. She could not confide in her sisters, could not share the turmoil raging inside her. She began to withdraw, spending more time alone, her thoughts consumed by Daniel. She felt both exhilarated and ashamed, caught between the life she had chosen and the life she suddenly yearned for. The contrast between her faith and her desire became a daily battle. She was slowly losing. As the weeks passed, Daniel's influence grew stronger. He began to speak of a future together, of the work they could do side by side in Cairo. He painted a picture of a life filled with purpose, adventure, and love, a life Maria had never dared to imagine. The more he spoke, the more real it seemed. Maria's resolve weakened, her longing overpowering her fear. She told herself that love was not a sin, that perhaps this was God's answer to her prayers for meaning and connection. But beneath the surface, danger was gathering. Daniel's words, so full of promise, were laced with manipulation. Maria, blinded by hope and longing, could not see the trap being set. And as their secret romance deepened, the line between salvation and ruin grew ever more blurred, drawing Maria closer to a decision that would change everything. It was a message that arrived late one evening, just as Maria was preparing for bed. The subject line was simple, a new beginning, but the words inside would echo in her mind for days to come. Daniel wrote of a project he was starting in Cairo, a mission to help Christian refugees and impoverished families in the city's poorest neighborhoods. He described the desperate need for compassion, for someone with Maria's heart and faith. "I can't do this alone," he wrote. "I need someone I can trust. Someone who understands what it means to serve." He painted a vivid picture of the work they could do together, feeding the hungry, teaching children, bringing hope to those who had none. He spoke of the city's beauty, its ancient churches and vibrant markets, the way the Nile shimmered at sunset. But beneath the noble purpose, there was something more, a promise of a life shared, of days spent side by side, of a love that could finally be real. "Come to Cairo, Maria," he pleaded. "Let's build something beautiful together. I believe God brought us together for a reason." Maria stared at the screen, her heart pounding. The invitation was everything she had secretly longed for, a chance to make a difference, to escape the confines of the convent, to be with the man who had come to mean so much to her. But it was also a temptation, a test of everything she believed. She knew what her vows meant: poverty, chastity, obedience. She had promised her life to God, to her sisters, to the quiet certainty of service. To leave now, to follow Daniel, would be a betrayal of all she had built. Yet the longing inside her was fierce. She imagined herself in Cairo, her hands busy with good work, her days filled with purpose and love. She saw herself walking through crowded streets, Daniel at her side, their laughter mingling with the sounds of the city. She felt alive in a way she never had before, the ache of loneliness replaced by hope and excitement. But with every vision of happiness came a shadow of doubt. Was this truly God's will, or simply her own desire? Maria prayed for guidance, her words tumbling out in desperate whispers. She sought counsel from Scripture, from the memory of Sister Annis's gentle wisdom. But the answers did not come. Instead, she found herself haunted by Daniel's words, by the promise of a life that felt both forbidden and irresistible. She began to withdraw even further from her sisters. Her secret growing heavier with each passing day. Daniel sensed her hesitation and pressed his case with increasing urgency. He sent her articles about the suffering in Cairo, photographs of children in need, stories of hope and redemption. He reminded her of her own prayers for meaning, for a chance to serve beyond the convent walls. "This is your calling, Maria," he insisted. "Don't let fear hold you back. We can do so much good together." The pressure mounted, and Maria's resolve began to crumble. She told herself that love and service were not mutually exclusive, that perhaps God was calling her to a new path. She clung to the hope that she could have both a life of purpose and a love that filled the emptiness inside her. The decision weighed on her like a stone. Every moment filled with uncertainty and longing. Finally, after weeks of sleepless nights and silent tears, Maria made her choice. She would go to Cairo. She would trust in love, in hope, in the promise of a new beginning. She packed her few belongings, her hands trembling as she tucked her Bible into her bag. She left a note for her sisters, asking for forgiveness and understanding. Her words heavy with sorrow and hope as she boarded the plane. Maria looked out at the world below, her heart a storm of fear and anticipation. She had no idea what awaited her in Cairo. No way of knowing that the journey she had begun would lead her not to salvation, but to a darkness she could never have imagined. The night Maria left the convent was shrouded in silence, the kind that presses against the heart and makes every footstep echo with finality. She rose before dawn, careful not to wake the other sisters, as she dressed in plain clothes and packed her few belongings into a small, worn bag. Her Bible, a rosary, a faded photograph of her family, these were the only treasures she allowed herself. The convent, usually a place of comfort and certainty, felt suddenly foreign, its stone corridors cold and unwelcoming. Each step toward the door was a step away from everything she had ever known. Maria paused in the chapel, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows across the altar. She knelt, her hands trembling, and whispered a prayer for forgiveness and protection. Tears blurred her vision as she remembered the faces of her sister's Sister Agnes, who had always believed in her. Sister Lucia, who made her laugh on the hardest days. The novices, who looked up to her with wide, trusting eyes. The weight of her decision pressed down on her, mingling guilt with hope. She left a letter on her pillow, her handwriting shaky but resolute. "I must follow where I am called. Please pray for me." As she slipped out the side gate, the world outside felt both exhilarating and terrifying. The air was cool, tinged with the scent of dew and distant rain. Maria's heart pounded with fear and anticipation. She moved quickly through the empty streets, her mind racing with doubts. Was she betraying her vows, or answering a higher calling? Was Daniel truly the man he seemed, or was she blinded by her own longing? At the bus station, Maria hesitated, her resolve wavering as she purchased a ticket to the airport. The clerk, an older woman with kind eyes, glanced at her with concern. "Are you sure you want to do this, dear?" she asked softly, as if sensing Maria's turmoil. Maria forced a smile, nodding, but the question lingered in her mind. Even the taxi driver who took her to the airport seemed to sense her unease. Glancing at her in the rearview mirror and offering a quiet, "Take care of yourself, Signorina," the airport was a blur of noise and movement. A stark contrast to the quiet order of the convent. Maria clutched her bag tightly, her nerves frayed by the unfamiliar chaos. She watched families embrace, travelers rush by, and wondered if anyone could see the storm inside her. As she waited at the gate, she reread Daniel's last message. "I'll be waiting for you. Everything will be different now." His words were a lifeline, pulling her forward. But beneath them was a current of uncertainty she could not ignore, as the plane lifted off. Maria pressed her forehead to the window, watching the landscape fall away beneath her. She felt a pang of grief for the life she was leaving behind, for the sisters who would wake to find her gone. But mingled with the sorrow was a fragile hope, a belief that she was stepping into a new chapter. One filled with purpose and love. She whispered a final prayer, asking for strength and guidance. Her voice lost in the roar of the engines, yet, as the clouds swallowed the world below, a chill crept into Maria's heart. She could not shake the feeling that she was not just leaving home, but crossing a threshold from which there would be no return. The warnings, so subtle and easy to dismiss, echoed in her mind. But Maria clung to hope, unaware that the journey ahead would test her faith and courage in ways she could never have imagined. The moment Maria stepped off the plane, the air hit her like a wave thick with heat, dust, and the scent of spices she couldn't name. Cairo was alive in a way she had never experienced. A city of endless motion, where horns blared, voices rose and fell in a dozen languages, and the ancient and modern collided at every turn. The airport was a blur of faces, colors, and sounds, so different from the quiet order of the convent. Maria clutched her bag tightly, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. She scanned the crowd for Daniel, searching for the familiar face she had only seen in photographs. When he finally appeared, he was not quite as she had imagined. He looked older, more tired, his smile strained. He greeted her with a quick embrace, his eyes darting nervously around the arrivals hall. "Welcome to Cairo, Maria," he said, his voice softer than she remembered from their calls. "Let's get your things and go. It's a long drive." The ride through the city was dizzying. Maria pressed her face to the window, taking in the chaos of the streets, vendors shouting, children weaving through traffic, the call to prayer echoing from distant minarets. She tried to ask Daniel about the city, about the mission work he had promised. But he seemed distracted, answering in clipped sentences. "We'll talk later," he said, his gaze fixed on the road. "You must be tired." They arrived at a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. Far from the bustling heart Maria had imagined. The building was old, the stairwell dim and echoing with the sounds of neighbors arguing behind closed doors. Daniel led her inside, locking the door behind them. The apartment was sparse, bare walls, a single bed, a table cluttered with papers. Maria tried to hide her disappointment, telling herself that this was only temporary, that the real work would begin soon. But as the days passed, the reality of her new life began to sink in. Daniel was not the attentive, loving partner she had come to know online. He was often gone for hours, leaving Maria alone in the apartment, with little explanation. When he was home, he was irritable and impatient, snapping at her questions and dismissing her concerns. The mission work he had promised seemed to vanish. There were no visits to churches, no meetings with refugees, no plans for the future. When Maria pressed him, Daniel grew defensive. "Things are complicated here," he would say. "You don't understand how dangerous it is. Just trust me." Maria tried to make the best of her situation, filling her days with prayer and reading, venturing out only when Daniel allowed it. The city that had once seemed so full of promise now felt like a labyrinth, its streets confusing and unfriendly. She missed the convent, the comfort of routine, the gentle presence of her sisters. She wrote letters she never sent, pouring her confusion and loneliness onto the page. The contrast between her dreams and reality was stark. She had imagined a life of purpose and partnership, of love and service. Instead, she found herself isolated, dependent, and increasingly afraid. Daniel's behavior grew more controlling. He monitored her phone calls, questioned her every move, and insisted she not speak to anyone without his permission. When she tried to assert herself, he would remind her of all she had given up to be with him. Twisting her hope into guilt, Maria's faith became her only anchor. She clung to her Bible, reading the same passages over and over, searching for comfort and guidance. She prayed for Daniel, for herself, for a sign that she had not made a terrible mistake. But the silence that answered her prayers was heavy, filled with doubt and regret. Still, Maria tried to hold on to hope. She told herself that things would get better, that Daniel was simply under stress, that the life she had dreamed of was still possible. But deep down, a cold fear was growing, a sense that she was trapped in a world she did not understand, with a man she no longer recognized. And as the days turned into weeks, Maria realized that the journey she had begun in hope was leading her deeper into darkness. With no clear way out, at first, Maria tried to convince herself that the loneliness was only temporary, a natural part of adjusting to a new life in a foreign land. She told herself that Daniel was simply busy, that the city was overwhelming, that she needed time to find her footing. But as the days stretched into weeks, the walls of the small apartment seemed to close in around her, and the world outside became more distant with every passing hour. Daniel's absences grew longer and more frequent. He would leave early in the morning, returning late at night, often without explanation. When Maria asked where he had been, he would brush her off, sometimes snapping, "You wouldn't understand. It's not safe for you to know." The warmth that had once filled his messages and calls was gone, replaced by a cold impatience. He no longer spoke of their future together, of the mission work that had drawn Maria to Cairo in the first place. Instead, he seemed irritated by her presence, as if she were a burden he had not anticipated. Maria's attempts to reach out to her family and the sisters back home were met with resistance. Daniel insisted that it was too dangerous for her to contact anyone outside Egypt. "You don't know who's listening," he warned. "You could put us both at risk." He took her phone, promising to get her a new one with a local number, but days passed, and it never materialized. When she asked to use the internet, he claimed the connection was unreliable, or that it was better not to draw attention to themselves. "You have to trust me, Maria," he would say, his tone brooking no argument. "I'm only trying to protect you." At first, Maria believed him. She wanted to believe him. She remembered the man who had written her such tender words, who had seemed to understand her soul. She told herself that he was under stress, that the city was dangerous, that he was only trying to keep her safe. But as her world shrank to the four walls of the apartment, doubt began to creep in. She realized she had no way to leave, no money of her own, no friends or contacts in Cairo. She was utterly dependent on Daniel for everything: food, shelter, even the smallest connection to the outside world. The isolation was suffocating. Maria tried to keep busy, cleaning the apartment, cooking meals, praying for hours on end. But the silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant sounds of the city and the occasional outburst from Daniel when he returned home. He began to criticize her, her cooking, her cleaning, her questions. "You're not grateful," he would say. "You don't understand how hard this is for me." He accused her of being unfaithful, of wanting to run back to her old life. "You think you're better than me, don't you?" he sneered one night, his eyes cold and hard. Maria was stunned by the change in him. She tried to reason with him, to remind him of the love and faith that had brought them together. But Daniel only grew more distant, more controlling. He began to monitor her every move, questioning her about where she had been, what she had done, even what she was thinking. He would disappear for hours, then return and demand to know why she hadn't waited by the door. He accused her of plotting against him, of trying to contact people behind his back. The psychological manipulation was relentless. Daniel would alternate between cold indifference and sudden, overwhelming affection. One moment, he would berate her. The next he would apologize, blaming his behavior on stress or fear. "I'm sorry, Maria," he would say. his voice trembling. "I just love you so much. I can't lose you. You're all I have." He would hold her close, whispering promises of a better future, only to withdraw again the next day, leaving her more confused and desperate than before. Maria's sense of self began to erode. She questioned her own judgment, her own worth. She wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. If she was being punished for leaving the convent, for daring to hope for something more. She felt ashamed, guilty, and utterly alone. The Bible that had once been her comfort now felt like a reminder of everything she had lost: her faith, her family, her freedom. She tried to reach out, writing letters she never sent, praying for a sign, for someone to rescue her from the prison her life had become. But Daniel always seemed to know when she was slipping away, always found a way to pull her back in. He would remind her of the sacrifices she had made, of the impossibility of returning home. "No one will take you back now," he whispered one night, his words like poison. "You belong to me. You have nowhere else to go." The days blurred together, each one darker than the last. Maria's hope faded, replaced by a numb resignation. She stopped asking questions, stopped dreaming of escape. She moved through her days like a ghost, her spirit broken by the relentless cycle of isolation and manipulation. But the worst was yet to come. Maria could not know that her world was about to shatter completely, that the darkness she felt closing in was only the beginning. And as the city outside carried on, indifferent to her suffering, Maria's story was hurtling toward a moment of reckoning that would leave only silence and a single Bible in the dust. The final days before Maria's disappearance were marked by a tension so thick it seemed to seep into the very walls of the apartment. Daniel's moods became more volatile, his temper flaring at the smallest provocation. The arguments, once rare, now erupted daily over meals, over money, over Maria's longing to step outside, even for a moment of sunlight. Each confrontation left her more shaken, her hope for reconciliation slipping further away. Maria's fear grew with every passing hour. She noticed things she hadn't before. The way Daniel locked the door behind him. The way he kept her passport hidden. The way he watched her with suspicion even when she was doing nothing at all. She felt trapped, a prisoner in a city that had once promised her a new beginning. The apartment, once a place of anticipation, now felt like a cage. Desperation began to take hold. Maria searched for any opportunity to reach out for help. One afternoon, while Daniel was out, she found his old phone, tucked away in a drawer. Her hands shook as she tried to dial the number of the convent, but the call would not go through. The phone was locked, the SIM card missing. She tried to write a letter, but Daniel returned before she could finish, snatching the paper from her hands and tearing it to shreds. "Who are you writing to?" he demanded, his voice cold and menacing. "You're not going anywhere, Maria, you belong here." The fear in Maria's eyes only seemed to fuel Daniel's paranoia. He accused her of plotting against him, of trying to escape. He began to follow her from room to room, never letting her out of his sight. At night, Maria lay awake, listening to the sounds of the city outside, her mind racing with plans for escape. She prayed for courage, for a miracle, for someone to notice her absence and come looking. One evening, after a particularly vicious argument, Daniel stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Maria seized the moment, searching the apartment for anything that might help her. She found her Bible, tucked beneath a pile of clothes, and clutched it to her chest. Inside, she discovered a small scrap of paper with the address of a nearby church, a place Daniel had once mentioned in passing. It was a slim hope, but it was all she had. The next morning, Maria waited until Daniel left, then slipped out of the apartment, her heart pounding with fear and adrenaline. The streets of Cairo were a maze, the noise and chaos overwhelming. She kept her head down, clutching her Bible, searching for the church. But the city was unforgiving, and Maria soon realized she was being followed. She quickened her pace, ducking into alleys and side streets. But the sense of danger only grew. As dusk fell, Maria reached the church, only to find it closed and deserted. She pounded on the door, her pleas echoing in the empty courtyard, but no one answered. Exhausted and terrified, she sank to her knees, clutching her Bible, tears streaming down her face. She whispered a final prayer, begging for deliverance. For someone to find her before it was too late. That night, Maria vanished. No one saw her leave the church courtyard. No one heard her cries above the noise of the city. The next morning, a street sweeper found her Bible lying in the dust, its pages fluttering in the breeze. There was no sign of Maria, no note, no trace. Nothing but the haunting silence of a life disappeared. For those who loved her, the days that followed were filled with anguish and unanswered questions. The city moved on, indifferent to the loss of one more soul. But for those who knew Maria's story, the image of her Bible in the dust would become a symbol of hope lost, of a journey that ended in darkness, and of a mystery that would haunt them forever. When the first letter from Maria failed to arrive, her sisters at the convent tried to reassure themselves. Perhaps she was busy, perhaps the mail was slow, perhaps she was simply adjusting to her new life. But, as days turned into weeks with no word, worry gave way to dread. Sister Agnes, who had always been closest to Maria, gathered the other nuns in the chapel, her voice trembling as she read aloud the last note Maria had left behind. "Please pray for me." The words echoed in the silent room, heavy with fear and uncertainty. Maria's family, too, felt the growing weight of her absence. Her mother called the convent in tears, her father's voice breaking as he asked if anyone had heard from his daughter. The Rossi family had always been close, bound by faith and tradition, and the thought of Maria alone in a foreign city filled them with helpless terror. They wrote letters, made phone calls, and reached out to anyone who might have news. But every effort was met with silence. Desperation soon turned to action. The convent contacted the Italian embassy in Cairo, pleading for help. Maria's brother, Marco, flew to Egypt, determined to find his sister. He arrived in Cairo with a photograph of Maria and a heart full of hope, but the city was vast and indifferent. He visited churches, hospitals, and police stations, showing Maria's picture to anyone who would listen. Most shook their heads, some offered vague reassurances. But no one had seen her. The Egyptian authorities were slow to respond. Missing persons cases, especially those involving foreigners, were often lost in a maze of bureaucracy. Marco was shuffled from one office to another, each official promising to look into the matter, each form more complicated than the last. Language barriers and cultural differences only added to the frustration. "She is an adult," one officer shrugged. "Maybe she left on her own. Maybe she will come back." The implication was clear. Maria's disappearance was not their priority. Back at the convent, the sisters organized prayer vigils, lighting candles and reciting rosaries late into the night. They sent emails to international aid organizations, hoping someone, somewhere, would take notice. Maria's mother called the embassy every day, her voice growing weaker with each unanswered plea. The family's grief was compounded by the sense of powerlessness. The knowledge that Maria was out there somewhere, and that they could do nothing but wait. The search for Maria became a test of faith and endurance. Every day brought new rumors, new dead ends, new heartbreak. Marco walked the streets of Cairo until his feet bled. Haunted by the thought that his sister might be just around the corner, calling out for help. The convent sisters clung to hope. But the silence from Cairo grew heavier with each passing day. As the days stretched into weeks, the emotional devastation deepened. Maria's absence was a wound that would not heal, a question that would not be answered. The world moved on, but for those who loved her, time stood still. And as the search dragged on, one thing became painfully clear. Finding Maria would not be easy. The city that had swallowed her up was vast, its secrets well kept, and the forces working against her family and sisters were as relentless as the desert sun. It was a street sweeper who found it. Early one morning, as the city was just beginning to stir, the Bible lay half buried in the dust of a narrow alley, its cover worn, its pages marked with careful notes in Italian. The name inside, Maria Elena Rossi, was written in a neat, hopeful hand. For days, the book sat in a lost and found box at a local police station, overlooked and unclaimed, until a young officer, moved by the foreign name and the desperate calls from the Italian embassy, made the connection. When Marco arrived at the station and saw his sister's Bible, he broke down. He ran his fingers over the familiar cover, searching for some hidden message, some clue that might lead him to Maria. The sisters at the convent wept when they heard the news, clinging to the hope that the Bible's discovery meant Maria was still alive, somewhere in the city. But as the days passed, hope gave way to grim determination. The Bible was not just a keepsake, it was a clue. The only tangible link to Maria's final days. Investigators began to piece together what little they could. They retraced Maria's steps, visiting the church whose address she had scribbled on a scrap of paper, questioning priests and parishioners who remembered a frightened young woman knocking on their door. Some recalled seeing her, others did not. The trail was faint, easily lost in the chaos of Cairo's streets. As they dug deeper, Daniel's story began to unravel. The man who had charmed Maria with promises of love and purpose was not who he claimed to be. His real name was different, his background a patchwork of half-truths and lies. He had a history of targeting vulnerable women online, weaving tales of faith and need, drawing them in with flattery and false hope. Maria was not his first victim, nor, investigators feared, would she be his last. The authorities found evidence of other women who had come to Cairo under similar circumstances, their stories echoing Maria's, a promise of love, a new beginning, a sudden disappearance. Some had managed to escape, returning home with scars, both visible and hidden. Others, like Maria, had simply vanished, their fates unknown. The pattern was clear, but the man at the center of it all remained elusive, slipping through the cracks of a system ill-equipped to pursue justice across borders. For Maria's family and the sisters at the convent, the Bible became a symbol of both loss and hope. They clung to it, reading her notes, her prayers, her favorite passages, searching for answers in the margins. Each word was a reminder of the woman they loved, a woman of faith, of courage, of longing. The Bible was all that remained, a silent witness to a story that had ended in darkness. Yet even as the investigation stalled, the discovery of the Bible galvanized those who cared for Maria. It was proof that she had been there, that she had fought to survive, that her story mattered. And as they mourned her absence, they vowed to keep searching, to keep asking questions, to keep her memory alive. For in the end, the Bible was more than a clue, it was a call to action. A reminder that even in the face of loss, love endures. And the search for truth must go on, the truth, when it finally emerged, was more devastating than anyone had imagined. As investigators dug deeper into Daniel's past, a chilling pattern began to take shape. A web of deceit that stretched far beyond Maria, ensnaring women from across continents and backgrounds. Daniel, whose real name was revealed to be Samir Khalil, had spent years perfecting his scheme. He haunted online religious forums and support groups, searching for women who were isolated, searching, or in crisis. His messages were always tailored, always gentle at first, always laced with empathy and understanding. For each woman, he became exactly what she needed: a confidant, a spiritual guide, a romantic partner, a savior. He learned their fears and dreams, their weaknesses and hopes, and used them as tools to draw them closer. He promised love, purpose, and a new beginning, always in Cairo, always just out of reach. For some, it was the hope of a family. For others, the promise of meaningful work or spiritual fulfillment. The stories varied, but the ending was always the same: isolation, dependence, and, for many, disappearance. The authorities uncovered emails, chat logs, and financial records that painted a damning picture. Samir had lured at least 7 women to Cairo over the past 5 years. Some had managed to escape, their stories buried in shame and fear, unwilling to come forward. Others, like Maria, had simply vanished. Their last traces, a few belongings left behind: a suitcase, a letter, a Bible. The women who survived described a man who shifted from charming to cruel in an instant, who used threats, manipulation, and violence to maintain control. The emotional impact of these revelations was shattering. Maria's family, already devastated by her loss, now faced the reality that she had been one of many, her suffering part of a calculated pattern. The sisters at the convent wept for Maria and for the others, their prayers now tinged with anger and grief. The Italian embassy, shamed by their slow response, pushed for a broader investigation, but Samir remained elusive. Slipping through the cracks of international law and local corruption, for those who loved Maria, the truth was a double-edged sword. It brought answers, but also unbearable pain. The image of the gentle, faithful woman they had known was now forever linked to a story of betrayal and exploitation. Yet, in the midst of heartbreak, there was also a sense of resolve. Maria's story, once hidden in the shadows, was now part of a larger fight for justice. Her Bible, found in the dust, became a symbol, not just of loss, but of the courage to speak out, to demand answers, to protect others from the same fate, as the full extent of Samir's crimes came to light. The world that had once seemed indifferent began to take notice. News outlets picked up the story, advocacy groups called for reform, and women across the globe shared their own experiences, breaking the silence that had allowed predators like Samir to thrive. The truth, though painful, was a necessary reckoning, a chance to honor Maria's memory by ensuring that her suffering would not be in vain. But for those who had loved her, the truth was also a final devastating goodbye. The hope that Maria might one day return was gone, replaced by the knowledge of what she had endured. Yet, even in the darkness, her story shone as a warning, a call to vigilance, and a testament to the enduring power of love and faith in the face of unimaginable betrayal. In the months that followed the truth's unveiling, Maria's absence became a constant ache for those who loved her. Her family's home in Italy was quieter now, her mother's laughter replaced by long silences and tearful prayers. Her father, once so strong, moved through his days with a heaviness that never seemed to lift. Marco, her brother, struggled with guilt, haunted by the thought that he should have done more, should have seen the signs, should have found her in time. Every family gathering was marked by the empty chair at the table, the unspoken hope that Maria might somehow walk through the door at the convent. The sisters mourned not only Maria, but the innocence they had lost. The chapel where she once prayed became a place of both solace and sorrow. Sister Agnes, who had guided Maria through her doubts, found herself questioning her own faith, wondering how such evil could find its way into the life of someone so devoted. The sisters lit candles for Maria every night. Their prayers now mingled with a fierce determination to protect others from similar fates. For the other victims, Maria's story was both a source of pain and a catalyst for healing. Some came forward, sharing their own experiences for the first time, finding comfort in the knowledge that they were not alone. Support groups formed, advocacy organizations pushed for better protections, and the international community began to take notice. yet justice remained elusive. Samir Khalil, the man who had caused so much suffering, vanished into the shadows, his whereabouts unknown. The authorities promised to continue the search, but hope for true accountability faded with each passing day. Lingering questions haunted everyone touched by Maria's story. Could more have been done? Why had the warning signs been missed? How many others were still at risk? The grief was raw, the reckoning incomplete. But in the midst of sorrow, there was also a quiet strength, a resolve to remember Maria, not just as a victim, but as a woman of faith and courage, whose story would serve as a warning and a call to action for others. Maria's story is a haunting reminder that danger can wear many faces, even those that seem gentle, loving, and full of faith. Her journey began with hope and a longing for connection, but ended in heartbreak, loss, and unanswered questions. It is a cautionary tale for anyone who has ever reached out across the digital void, searching for understanding, friendship, or love. The truth is, online romance scams do not discriminate. They prey on loneliness, trust, and the very human desire to be seen and valued. Even the most devout, the most careful, can be vulnerable. For those watching, let Maria's story be a warning. Trust your instincts, and never ignore the small red flags that flutter at the edges of your heart. If someone you meet online asks you to keep secrets, isolates you from loved ones, or pressures you to make life-changing decisions, pause and seek advice from those you trust. No genuine relationship, romantic or spiritual, should ever require secrecy, sacrifice of your safety, or the abandonment of your support system. If you or someone you know is considering traveling to meet someone met online, take every precaution. Share your plans with family and friends. Research the person's background. Insist on transparency and honesty. And remember, it is never a betrayal of faith or love to protect yourself. Your safety and well-being matter. Maria's family and her sisters continue to honor her memory by sharing her story, supporting others, and advocating for stronger protections against online predators. Their grief is real, but so is their hope that by speaking out, they can spare others the pain they have endured. Healing is a long and difficult journey, but it begins with awareness, vigilance, and the courage to ask hard questions. As you turn off this story and return to your own life, carry Maria's legacy with you. Be vigilant, be wise, and above all, be kind to yourself and to those who may be quietly struggling. In a world where trust can be so easily betrayed, let us all strive to be sources of light, support, and hope for one another. Maria's story does not end in darkness, but in the promise that her life and her loss will help others find their way to safety, healing, and peace.